Here's a diplomatic bombshell that could reshape the entire Ukrainian conflict. Donald Trump is preparing to sit down with Vladimir Putin next week, and the terms being discussed might shock Ukraine's supporters worldwide. The stage is set for a high-stakes encounter in Alaska this Friday, where the American president and his Russian counterpart will attempt to hammer out a peace deal that could fundamentally alter Ukraine's territorial integrity. But here's where it gets controversial. The proposed agreement may force Ukraine to surrender significant portions of its sovereign land to end a brutal conflict that has raged for 3.5 years. Confirmation of this crucial summit came from both Washington and Moscow, with Yuri Ushakov, a senior Kremlin official, noting the practical logic of their delegation simply crossing the Bering Strait for the meeting. The Russian side has even extended an invitation for a follow-up summit on Russian soil, signaling their serious commitment to these negotiations. Trump hasn't minced words about what this peace might cost Ukraine. Speaking to reporters, he acknowledged the harsh reality facing both nations after years of devastating warfare. "You're examining territory that has witnessed 3.5 years of fierce combat. Countless Russians and Ukrainians have perished." Trump explained, "There will need to be some territorial exchanges that benefit both parties. But here's the part most people miss. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wasn't even invited to this critical discussion about his country's future." An insider familiar with the negotiations, speaking anonymously due to the sensitive nature of these talks, confirmed that Zelensky remains excluded from the initial meeting. This exclusion has sparked immediate resistance from the Ukrainian leader, who took to social media early Saturday with a defiant message. Ukrainians will never gift their homeland to the occupier. He went further, declaring that any peace agreements reached without Ukraine's participation would be dead on arrival and completely unworkable. The momentum toward this summit accelerated dramatically following Wednesday's 3-hour Moscow meeting between Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and Putin. For the first time in this conflict, according to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Putin presented specific examples of what Russia would demand to end the war. This marked a potential breakthrough in negotiations that have previously stalled over vague terms and unrealistic demands. Here's where the territorial mathematics becomes stark and troubling. When Trump mentions territorial swapping, the reality is heavily lopsided. Ukraine currently holds roughly 4 square miles of Russian territory in the western Kursk region, a tiny fraction compared to Russia's control over approximately 1/5 of Ukraine's sovereign territory. Ukraine's bold August 2024 seizure of 500 square miles of Russian land has largely evaporated after a year of strategic retreats, leaving them with minimal bargaining power. Russia's wish list reads like a conqueror's demands. Moscow insists on formal recognition of its illegal 2014 annexation of Crimea, plus control over 4 additional eastern Ukrainian regions: Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. The territorial control varies significantly. Russia completely dominates Luhansk, but struggles to fully capture key cities in Donetsk region. Ukrainian forces successfully pushed Russian troops from Kherson city during a 2022 counteroffensive, though Moscow still controls portions of that region. In Zaporizhia, Russian forces have never reached the regional capital, which serves as a refuge for thousands of Ukrainians fleeing frontline areas. And this is the part most people miss. Ukraine faces constitutional barriers that could make any territorial concessions legally impossible. Trump acknowledged this challenge, noting that Zelensky isn't authorized to do certain things. The American president indicated that Zelensky would need to get it fast. Because negotiations are approaching a potential deal, and the Ukrainian leader is apparently working to address these constitutional constraints. The choice of Alaska as the meeting location wasn't random. Several global venues were initially considered, including the United Arab Emirates, which Putin publicly suggested. However, locations like Rome posed significant complications due to the International Criminal Court's 2023 arrest warrant for Putin, related to allegations of child abductions from Ukraine during the war. Since the United States doesn't participate in the ICC, Alaska provides a legally safe meeting ground. The real challenge lies in bridging the enormous gap between Russian demands and what Ukraine and its European allies can stomach. According to sources familiar with the discussions, Russia presented Witkoff with a proposal demanding Ukraine surrender the entire Donbas region, encompassing both Luhansk and Donetsk, in exchange for a ceasefire. The proposal's treatment of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions remains unclear, though Russia's territorial gains in these areas have secured their coveted land bridge to Crimea, a vital supply route for military and economic resources to the strategic peninsula. The stakes extend beyond territory to include the massive Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in Enerhodar, Europe's largest nuclear facility. Russian control since 2022 has kept this plant inactive, creating ongoing safety concerns that repeatedly surface in negotiations. Under the Russian proposal, Moscow's seizure of Crimea would receive formal recognition as Russian sovereign territory. But here's where expert analysis gets really concerning. Tatiana Stanovaya, senior fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center, believes Russia hasn't modified its ultimate war objectives, which include demilitarizing Ukraine, removing Zelensky's government, which Russia considers anti-Russian, and ensuring Ukraine's permanent neutrality. Putin's recent carefully choreographed visit to a northeastern Russian island monastery reinforced these unchanged positions. Russia views its Ukrainian territorial seizures as reclaiming rightful land, considers Ukraine's government illegitimate, and maintains that massive Russian casualties haven't been in vain. Territory isn't the primary concern, Stanovaya explained. Moscow's signals that the Witkoff proposal might be acceptable suggest the US is showing willingness to discuss the fundamental issues Russia considers the conflict's root causes. European opposition to previous proposals has been fierce. In April, Europe and Ukraine rejected a Witkoff proposal that included completely lifting US economic sanctions on Russia, Ukrainian neutrality, and recognition of Russian territorial seizures in exchange for freezing the conflict at current battle lines. Ukrainians and Europeans argued these terms provided no adequate security guarantees and would simply allow Russia to regroup and seize more territory later. The Kremlin believes Zelensky now operates from a significantly weaker position compared to spring, both militarily and politically, due to Russian battlefield advances, according to Stanovaya's analysis. European leaders are genuinely distressed by the prospect of Trump and Putin collaborating to impose terms on Ukraine without meaningful consultation. Despite all the tough talk, Trump hasn't applied even the slightest pressure on Putin. Yet. Absolutely zero, complained a senior European official after summit discussions began. Russian analysts suggest Putin remains convinced he's winning this war and can achieve his goal of completely subjugating Ukraine, stripping away its military capabilities and defense capacity while permanently blocking NATO membership. Ukrainian officials had desperately hoped America would insist on a three-way meeting including Zelensky. Thursday discussions between US, European and Ukrainian officials initially envisioned separate bilateral meetings, Trump with Putin, then Trump with Zelensky, followed by a comprehensive three-party summit. However, Putin has consistently resisted direct meetings with Zelensky, which would imply recognition of the Ukrainian leader as an equal. Thursday's Putin statement dismissing potential meetings with Zelensky was telling. For this to occur, certain conditions must be established. Unfortunately, we remain far from creating such conditions. Ushakov confirmed that Witkoff raised the three-way summit concept during Wednesday's Moscow meeting. But the Russian side left this option completely without any comment whatsoever. Moscow's preference is clear. We propose focusing first on preparing a bilateral meeting with Trump, and we consider it most crucial that this meeting be successful and productive. Here's the million-dollar question that should spark serious debate. Is America about to abandon Ukraine to Russian territorial demands, or is this the pragmatic diplomacy needed to end a devastating war? The Alaska summit could either represent a betrayal of Ukrainian sovereignty or the hard choices necessary for peace. What do you think? Should Trump be negotiating Ukraine's future without Ukrainian representation at the table? Are territorial concessions an acceptable price for ending this conflict? Or does this set a dangerous precedent for international aggression? The implications of next week's meeting could reshape European security for generations. Share your thoughts below. Do you believe this diplomatic approach will bring lasting peace or simply reward Putin's aggression? This conversation affects far more than Ukraine's borders. It could determine how future international conflicts are resolved worldwide.